Harold's voice still echoed in my skull as I walked out of the glass conference room, every step feeling like it belonged to someone else. I heard whispers behind me, chairs scraping, someone muttering under their breath. I kept my chin up until I hit the hallway. Only then did my vision blur with tears I refused to let fall. He didn't just demote me. He humiliated me. In public. On purpose. For team morale, he'd said, his smile tight and practiced. We need fresh energy in leadership. Fresh energy. After 8 years of carrying his department through every crisis, every impossible deadline, every mess he'd created with his careless promises to clients, I was the one who stayed late. I was the one who fixed the broken projects. I was the one whose team actually delivered results while Harold took credit in board meetings. And now I was being shoved aside for Trevor, a guy who'd been here 18 months and spent half his time playing office politics instead of doing actual work. The hallway felt endless. My office was being packed up by security as I walked past. They wouldn't even let me do it myself. For the first time in years, I didn't know what waited for me outside those doors. But I knew one thing for certain. Harold wanted me gone. I just didn't know why yet. I ducked into the restroom to catch my breath, to steady myself before facing the parking lot and whatever came next. But before I could even reach the sink, I heard voices drifting through the vent from the hallway. Harold. And Trevor. She was too difficult, Harold said casually, like he was discussing coffee preferences or weekend plans. And frankly, she knew too much about how things actually run around here. Knew too much. My blood went cold. Trevor's voice came next, uncertain. You sure the board won't ask questions? She built half our client relationships. Harold chuckled, a sound that made my stomach turn. They never question me. I've been here 12 years. Emily's just another analyst who couldn't adapt to new leadership styles. My hands gripped the edge of the counter. So this wasn't about team morale. This wasn't about fresh energy or new directions. This was a cover. A calculated move to push me out before I could see something he didn't want me to see. And suddenly Harold's smile in that meeting made perfect sense. That wasn't confidence. That was relief. Relief that he'd gotten rid of a problem before it became his downfall. Back at my desk. Well, my former desk, I noticed something odd. My access to the analytics dashboard had already been cut. That meant IT had received the request before my demotion was even announced. He'd planned this down to the minute. Every password changed. Every file locked. Every trace of my 8 years here being systematically erased while I was still in the building. I booted up my personal laptop quietly, hidden under a stack of papers, and pulled up a tiny folder I'd kept saved to my cloud drive. Just a handful of screenshots and notes, inconsistencies I'd noticed in Harold's quarterly reports over the past few months. Numbers that never quite aligned. Budget justifications that seemed inflated. Timelines that didn't match actual project completion dates. I hadn't had time to investigate properly. My workload kept me too busy putting out fires to dig into why Harold's numbers always looked better than reality suggested. Now I had time. All the time in the world. A sick feeling hit me in waves. Did Harold need me out because I was getting too close to connecting the dots? Was I asking too many questions in budget meetings? My phone buzzed. An email from HR. Subject line. Immediate meeting required. The HR director, Marla, looked at me like I was already a ghost, someone who didn't quite exist anymore in the company's ecosystem. Her smile was practiced, sympathetic in that corporate way that meant absolutely nothing. This isn't personal, Emily, she said softly, sliding papers across her desk. You'll keep your pay and benefits until the end of the month. And of course, you're welcome to apply for other internal positions if something opens up. Internal positions. Bly. Like a stranger off the street. I felt heat crawl up my neck, anger mixing with humiliation. After 8 years of exemplary reviews, you're suggesting I apply for jobs like someone who just walked in off the street? She blinked, uncomfortable now. Harold believes the team needs a different dynamic going forward. It's a strategic decision. Strategic decision. fresh, dynamic. All the corporate phrases that meant we don't want you here anymore, and we're not going to tell you the real reason why. I signed the papers with a numb hand, barely reading the words. Severance, non-compete clause, confidentiality agreement. All of it designed to make me disappear quietly. When I placed my security badge on her desk, I swear her eyes flicked to it with relief, like she'd been worried I might cause a scene. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. The parking lot was empty and gray, the late afternoon sun hidden behind clouds that matched my mood perfectly. The cold air hit me like a slap, and something inside me finally broke. Just for a second. I sat in my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, replaying Harold's smug expression. The way he'd looked at me during that meeting like I was nothing. Like 8 years meant nothing. Like all my work, all my dedication, all the times I'd saved his reputation were completely worthless. The humiliation burned. The powerlessness felt suffocating. The blindsiding cruelty of it all made my chest feel like it was imploding. But then something shifted. A clarity I'd never felt before cut through the fog of hurt and anger. Harold wanted me gone because he thought I was a threat to him. He was right about that. But not in the way he imagined. He thought getting rid of me would solve his problem. He thought I'd disappear quietly, find another job, move on with my life while he continued whatever scheme he was running. He was wrong. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to burn bridges or trash him on social media or do anything petty and destructive. I was going to do something much more dangerous. I was going to succeed. For 2 weeks, I dug into everything I could access from outside the company. Public financial statements, press releases, industry reports, vendor contracts that were publicly filed, annual reports that went back 5 years. I cross-referenced dates, budget announcements, project completion timelines, and revenue projections. I built spreadsheets that would make an accountant weep with joy. Every inconsistency I'd noticed before, every small red flag I'd pushed aside because I was too busy actually working, now I had time to examine it all properly. And a pattern emerged. Clear as daylight once you knew what to look for. Harold had been massaging metrics for at least 2 years. Moving budget lines around to hide early project losses. Inflating success rates on client deliverables. Reporting projected revenue as actual revenue in quarterly updates. All small enough that no single item would trigger alarms, but together they painted a picture of systematic deception. And my clean, transparent reporting style, my insistence on accurate numbers and realistic timelines, had been a liability to him. A ticking time bomb that might expose his house of cards. He needed someone pliable in my position. Someone like Trevor, who cared more about impressing leadership than about actual accuracy. Harold needed me gone before I put it all together. Well, congratulations, Harold. Now I had all the time in the world. I filed paperwork for my own consulting firm 3 weeks after leaving the company. Keen advisory. Just my name, just my expertise, nothing flashy or dramatic. I didn't announce it on social media. Didn't tell former colleagues. Didn't even tell my sister, who would have worried about me taking such a risk. I built a simple website. Clean, professional, straightforward. A portfolio showcasing the successful projects I'd led. Carefully worded to avoid any confidentiality violations, but clear enough that anyone in the industry would recognize the scope and impact of my work. Then I started small. Local businesses struggling with operational inefficiencies. A non-profit drowning in outdated processes and desperate for someone to reorganize their program management. A small manufacturer that needed help streamlining their supply chain. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that would make headlines. Just solid strategic work that actually solved real problems. For the first time in years, I wasn't managing up to protect someone else's ego. I wasn't translating Harold's vague promises into actual deliverables. I wasn't shielding my team from his impulsive decisions. I was just solving problems. And I was good at it. Better than I'd realized when I was busy keeping Harold's department afloat. The work felt clean. Honest. Word spread faster than I expected. My first client, the struggling nonprofit, referred me to their sister organization across the state. That organization mentioned me to their board members, who ran businesses in adjacent industries. Then a regional supplier hired me for a massive restructuring effort. 6 months of intensive work reorganizing their entire operations division. The results were dramatic. Efficiency up 30%. Costs down 20%. Employee satisfaction actually improved because processes finally made sense. My name started appearing in industry circles. Not loudly, not dramatically, but as a quiet whisper among people who needed real solutions instead of corporate buzzwords. Call Keen. She actually fixes things. She's the one they brought in when the last consultant completely failed. I started getting inquiries from companies I'd never heard of, in industries I'd never worked in before, all asking the same question. Could I help them solve problems that seemed impossible? And I realized something powerful. I was becoming exactly what Harold had feared. Someone with expertise, reputation, and independence. Someone who didn't need his approval or his company's resources to prove my worth. Except now I wasn't under his control. Now he couldn't take credit for my work. Now I was building something that belonged entirely to me. The universe, I was learning, had interesting timing. 18 months after my demotion, I received an email that made my heart stop. The sender was Beatrice Thornton, a board member at my old company. The subject line read, "Confidential Consultation Inquiry." I stared at my screen for a full minute before opening it. "Ms. Keen, I hope this email finds you well. The board is currently exploring external support for a comprehensive strategic assessment of our operations. Your name has come up repeatedly in our discussions as someone with deep knowledge of our industry and proven expertise in organizational analysis. Would you be available for a preliminary consultation? External support. Strategic assessment. Deep knowledge. Translation. Something was wrong, they no longer trusted Harold to fix it, and they needed someone from outside to tell them the truth. My hands trembled as I typed a professional response. Yes, I was available. Yes, I'd be happy to discuss their needs. Yes, I maintained the highest standards of confidentiality and objectivity. But inside I was screaming. They were coming to me. The company that had pushed me out humiliated me, erased me like I'd never mattered. They needed me now. And Harold had no idea this was coming. I hit send and allowed myself one moment of pure, vindictive satisfaction before returning to my professional composure. The preliminary meeting took place in a small conference room at a neutral location, a business center downtown, far from the company's main office. 3 board members attended, including Beatrice. They looked tired, worried. The kind of exhaustion that comes from watching something slowly fall apart and not understanding why. Harold insists the recent performance issues are temporary, Beatrice said carefully, watching my reaction. Market fluctuations, client transitions, normal growing pains as the team adjusts to new leadership. Another board member, an older man named Warren, shook his head. But the numbers tell a different story. Revenue projections keep missing targets. Client retention is down 15%. 3 major accounts left in the last quarter alone. The third board member, a woman named Celeste, leaned forward. We need someone to objectively assess the company's operational health. Someone who understands our business but doesn't have a stake in protecting any particular person or department. Objective. That word carried so much weight. They wanted someone who didn't owe Harold anything. Someone he couldn't intimidate or manipulate. Someone who would tell them the truth, even if that truth was ugly. They spent an hour outlining their concerns, carefully dancing around, directly accusing Harold of incompetence or worse, but the subtext was clear. Their trust in him was cracking. They just needed proof. The contract they offered was airtight and beautiful in its simplicity. Full access to all operational data, financial records, and personnel files. No interference from management. Direct reporting to the board, not through Harold or any other executive. Confidentiality protections that would shield me from retaliation or legal action. And the fee, 3 times what I would have made in a month as their employee. As I signed my name, a thrill ran through me. Not petty excitement or vindictive glee. Something purer. The power of truth. The power of skill finally recognized and properly valued. The power of being in a position where Harold couldn't twist my work into something that served his agenda. I would walk back into that building not as an employee he could dismiss, but as someone they desperately needed. Someone whose expertise was being actively sought instead of quietly undermined. Beatrice shook my hand firmly. "We appreciate your professionalism, Ms. Keene. Given your history with the company, this can't be easy." Smiled. "My job is to provide accurate assessment and strategic recommendations. My personal feelings are irrelevant to that work." But as I walked to my car afterward, I let myself feel it. The sweet, intoxicating satisfaction of knowing that Harold's careful plans were about to unravel. Not because I was seeking revenge, but because I was going to do exactly what I'd always done. Tell the truth. Show the real numbers. Let the facts speak for themselves. Walking back into that lobby felt surreal, like stepping into a memory that had been preserved in amber. The same marble floors. The same abstract art on the walls. The same faint smell of burnt espresso from the breakroom coffee maker that never quite worked right. But everything was different now. There was a new receptionist who smiled politely at me like I was any other visitor. I wasn't an employee anymore. I wasn't subordinate to anyone in this building. I wasn't vulnerable to Harold's whims or manipulations. I was the expert they'd hired. The consultant they needed. The person who held the power to tell them what was really happening in their own company. My access badge, temporary marked consultant, felt heavier than my old employee badge ever had. It represented something Harold couldn't control, couldn't revoke, couldn't use as leverage. Security escorted me to a temporary office they'd set up for my use. Small but private, with a door that locked and a computer with administrative access to systems I'd never been allowed to see as an employee. Harold had no idea I was coming. The board had intentionally kept my hiring confidential until I was ready to begin the assessment. They wanted my initial observations to be uncontaminated by anyone's attempts to spin the narrative or hide problems. I almost felt mercy for Harold. Almost. The elevator doors opened on the operations floor just as Harold was stepping out, mid-conversation with someone from accounting. He was laughing at something, relaxed and confident in his domain. Then he saw me. His face collapsed. All the color drained away like someone had opened a valve. His smile vanished so completely it was like it had never existed. His eyes went wide with something that looked very much like fear. "Emily!" The name came out as barely a whisper, like he couldn't quite believe I was real. I nodded once, keeping my expression professionally neutral. "Good morning, Harold. I'll need full access to the operations and finance databases by end of business today." He stammered something incomprehensible, his usual smooth corporate speak completely failing him. The board member beside me, Warren, said calmly, "Miss Keene is our strategic consultant. She'll be conducting a comprehensive operational assessment. Please provide her with whatever access and information she requests." I watched Harold swallow hard, his throat working visibly. Watched him try to paste his professional smile back on and fail. Watched him realize that I wasn't here as someone he could dismiss or demote or push aside. I was here as someone who could expose everything he'd been hiding. And he knew it. Pure vindication flooded through me, better than any petty revenge could ever feel. I spent 3 days combing through everything. Every financial report. Every project timeline. Every budget justification. Every client communication log. The inconsistencies I'd suspected were worse than I'd imagined. Harold had been systematically inflating project success rates, hiding cost overruns by spreading them across other budget categories, and reporting preliminary client interest as confirmed contracts. And everywhere I looked, I found evidence of the problems starting right after I'd been demoted. Trevor didn't have the expertise to catch the discrepancies. He didn't understand the work well enough to know when numbers didn't match reality. He was exactly what Harold needed, someone who wouldn't ask difficult questions. Harold hovered nervously, popping into my temporary office every few hours with increasingly desperate attempts to explain things I hadn't asked about. That variance in Q2 was just a timing issue. Those client departures were unrelated to service quality. The budget reallocation was approved by finance. Each excuse made him look more guilty. Each justification revealed how deep the problems ran. He was unraveling right in front of me, and I hadn't even presented my findings yet. I maintained professional courtesy, took notes, thanked him for his input. But inside I was cataloging everything. Building an airtight case not through accusations but through simple documentation of facts. The breaking point came during a meeting with the finance department to review budget allocation processes. I'd requested the meeting to understand how Harold's department spending got approved and tracked. Harold showed up uninvited, agitated and defensive before anyone had even asked him a question. "I don't see why she needs access to all these internal finance procedures," he said, his voice rising. "This is operational information that's not relevant to strategic assessment." The finance director, a calm woman named Paulina, stared at him steadily. "Ms. Keene needs to understand our processes because your budget variances don't align with your reported outcomes. We've been flagging inconsistencies for 6 months. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. My heart thudded in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. This wasn't my revelation to make. This was Harold's own department exposing the cracks in his facade. "Those are just timing differences," Harold said weakly. "Timing differences don't explain why projects you reported as complete were still showing active costs 3 months later," Paulina replied, her tone professional but firm. Harold's face went from pale to flushed. He was drowning and everyone in the room could see it. I stayed silent. Silence was louder than any accusation I could make. Late one evening, I was reviewing files in my temporary office when someone knocked hesitantly. I looked up to see Yolanda, a junior analyst I vaguely remembered from my time in operations. She slipped inside and closed the door quietly, glancing over her shoulder like she expected someone to stop her. "There's something you should see," she whispered, pulling a flash drive from her pocket. "Harold told us to delete these files 6 months ago. Some of us didn't feel right about it, so we kept copies." She handed me the drive like it was evidence in a criminal case, her hands shaking slightly. I plugged it into my laptop and my breath caught. Inside were the original budget reports from Harold's department, before he'd revised them. Reports showing significant cost overruns, missed deadlines and client complaints. Reports that completely contradicted the versions he'd submitted to the board. And there were emails. Harold instructing his team to revise the narrative on project outcomes. Harold blaming budget variances on my old team. My team that I'd built and trained and led for years, claiming they'd mismanaged resources before he'd restructured the department. He'd made me the scapegoat for his own failures, and then removed me before I could defend the truth. Yolanda's voice was quiet. "We knew it was wrong. But we were afraid." I spent 2 days preparing a confidential report for the board. Not a rant, not an emotional accusation, but a methodical presentation of facts, timelines, and documented evidence. Every inflated metric paired with the original data. Every budget discrepancy traced back to its source. Every client complaint that had been suppressed or misrepresented. Every instance where Harold had blamed problems on legacy team issues, while hiding his own decisions that had caused those problems. And one critical statement that I wrote carefully, knowing it would change everything. Current operational challenges stem from systematic misrepresentation of project performance and budget allocation, intentionally obscured through data manipulation and suppression of accurate reporting. I didn't name Harold directly in that sentence. I didn't have to. The evidence made it obvious. Writing those words felt like lifting 100 pounds from my spine. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't personal vindication. This was truth. Simple, documented, undeniable truth. I attached the files Yolanda had given me, clearly labeled and organized. I included my own analysis, cross-referenced with publicly available data that corroborated the internal discrepancies. Then I sent it to Beatrice with a subject line that was professionally bland. Preliminary assessment complete. The board called an emergency meeting for the next morning. Harold cornered me in the hallway before the meeting. His professionalism completely stripped away now. His voice shook when he spoke, desperation seeping through every word. Emily, we can find a solution that works for both of us. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but surely there's room for compromise here. Both of us. Compromise. He wanted me to protect him, to soften my findings, to participate in the same kind of narrative manipulation he'd been doing for years. The old version of me, the one who'd been conditioned to smooth things over, to avoid conflict, to protect the team even when the team didn't protect me, might have felt conflicted. The current version of me felt nothing but clarity. I smiled politely, the same professional smile I'd perfected over 8 years of corporate life. My role is to deliver objective findings based on documented evidence. The board hired me specifically for that objectivity. His jaw tightened. A muscle twitched in his cheek. For the first time, he was truly understanding that he wasn't in control anymore. That his charm and his manipulation and his carefully constructed image weren't going to save him. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly, a last desperate attempt at intimidation. "No," I replied calmly. "I don't think I will." The boardroom was smaller than I expected, intimate in a way that made the moment feel even more significant. 5 board members sat around a polished table, with Harold seated at the far end. His expression carefully controlled, but his hands betraying him with small nervous movements. I presented my findings calmly, walking through each slide with professional detachment. The data spoke for itself. I didn't need to add drama or emotional weight. Harold grew paler with every slide. Every graph showing the gap between reported and actual performance. Every timeline revealing when problems had started. Every email chain demonstrating his awareness of the discrepancies. When I finished, the silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Beatrice, her voice steady but cold, asked, "Harold, do you dispute any of the findings Ms. Keene has presented?" Harold opened his mouth. No sound came out at first. He cleared his throat, tried again. "Some of this is taken out of context. These are complex projects with multiple variables." "Do you dispute the data?" Warren interrupted. Another silence. Longer this time. Harold's shoulders sagged. He simply shook his head. He knew there was no way to spin this. No way to talk his way out. The evidence was too comprehensive, too well documented, too clearly presented. He knew it was over. Everyone in the room knew it was over. But then Celeste cleared her throat, and I realized there was more to this story than even I had uncovered. "We should also note," she said carefully, pulling out her own folder, "that we've been conducting a parallel internal review for the past 2 months. We have additional documentation that corroborates Ms. Keene's findings." I blinked, genuinely surprised. Additional documentation. They'd already been investigating him. Beatrice nodded. "We hired you, Ms. Keene, because we needed an expert external perspective to confirm what we were seeing internally. We couldn't risk acting on suspicions alone. We needed comprehensive, objective analysis." So they'd already suspected Harold. They'd already gathered evidence. They just needed someone with credibility and expertise to connect all the pieces into a coherent picture. Someone who couldn't be accused of having an agenda or bias. Someone whose reputation for accuracy and integrity was beyond question. Harold's hands were trembling now, pressed flat against the table like he was trying to hold himself steady. The board hadn't just brought me in to audit operations. They'd brought me in as the final piece of Harold's downfall, the expert witness who would make their case undeniable. And Harold, by creating the circumstances that forced me out, had inadvertently created the perfect person to expose him. The vote happened quickly after that. Clinical, efficient, without unnecessary discussion. Beatrice moved to remove Harold from his position as vice president, effective immediately, pending a complete review of potential legal implications. Warren seconded. Celeste called for the vote. 7 minutes. That's how long it took to dismantle a career that Harold had spent 12 years building. 7 minutes to undo the man who'd dismantled my career in a single meeting 18 months ago. The vote was unanimous. Not a single dissenting voice. Not even a moment of hesitation. Harold didn't look at me. He couldn't. He just gathered his leather portfolio with shaking hands, stood on unsteady legs, and walked toward the door. His shoulders were caved inward. His usual confident posture completely collapsed. He looked smaller somehow, like the exposure had physically diminished him. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than any slam could have been. I sat very still, processing what had just happened. The vindication felt surreal, almost abstract. This was the man who'd publicly humiliated me, who'd stolen credit for my work for years, who'd pushed me out to hide his own corruption. And now he was gone. Not because I'd schemed or manipulated or sought revenge, but because I'd simply told the truth. After Harold left, the energy in the room shifted. The tension drained away, replaced by something that felt almost like relief mixed with exhaustion. Beatrice folded her hands on the table and looked at me directly. "Ms. Keene, your insight and leadership throughout this assessment have been invaluable. Your work has prevented this situation from causing catastrophic damage to the company." Warren nodded. "We'd like to extend a long-term partnership contract. You would oversee recovery initiatives across multiple divisions, working directly with department heads to rebuild operational integrity." My chest tightened. This wasn't just a job offer. This was respect, recognition, the acknowledgement that my expertise had real value, that my perspective mattered, that my work could shape the company's future. The one thing Harold had never given me, genuine professional respect, was being offered freely by the people who'd watched him try to erase me. Celeste added, "The compensation would be substantial, and you'd have significant autonomy in how you approach the recovery work." I looked at the contract terms they slid across the table. The numbers were impressive. The scope of work was exactly the kind of challenge I'd always wanted. Strategic, high-level, genuinely impactful. Everything I'd wanted while working here, now being offered without reservation. But something in me hesitated. A small voice asking if this was really what I wanted, or just what I'd thought I wanted before I'd discovered something different. I didn't accept immediately, and I could see the surprise on their faces. They'd expected me to jump at the opportunity, returning triumphant to the company that had pushed me out, vindicated and elevated to a position of real power. But I wasn't the same woman who'd walked out of that conference room 18 months ago. I'd built something real on my own. Something that belonged entirely to me. A reputation earned through my own work, not filtered through someone else's agenda. Relationships with clients who valued my expertise without question. A freedom that came from not depending on any single organization to define my worth. "I need some time to consider this," I said carefully. "It's a generous offer, and I'm genuinely grateful. But I owe it to my current clients to think through the implications carefully." The board members exchanged glances. Warren smiled slightly, something like approval in his expression. "Of course," Beatrice said. "Take a week. This is a significant decision." I left the boardroom with the contract folder under my arm, my mind already spinning through possibilities. The old familiar building around me felt like a museum now, a place that held my past but might not need to hold my future. That week would bring clarity. I just didn't know yet what form that clarity would take. During that week of consideration, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Is this Keene Advisory?" A professional voice asked. "Yes, this is Emily Keene." "Ms. Keene, my name is Phoebe Castellano. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for Westbridge Solutions. We're a national firm, and we've been following your work through industry channels. We'd like to discuss a rather significant opportunity with you." My heart started beating faster. Westbridge Solutions was massive. A consulting powerhouse that worked with Fortune 500 companies across the country. The conversation that followed was surreal. They wanted me to lead an entire division focused on operational restructuring and strategic assessment. They'd seen my work, heard about my reputation for accurate analysis and practical solutions, and they wanted to build a team around my approach. The scope was enormous. The resources unlimited. The platform to impact major corporations across multiple industries. And the compensation. I actually laughed out loud when she stated the figure, then apologized for my unprofessional response. "That's quite all right," Phoebe said warmly. "We find that the best people are often surprised by their own market value." After I hung up, I sat in my home office staring at the two paths in front of me. Both offered validation, success, significant compensation. But only one offered the future I'd been building since the day Harold pushed me out. I walked into that boardroom one final time, carrying both contracts, the one from my old company, and the one from Westbridge Solutions. Beatrice smiled when she saw me. "We're hoping that folder means good news." I set them both on the table and took a breath. "I want to thank you sincerely for the opportunity you've offered. Your confidence in my abilities means more than I can adequately express." Warren's smile faltered slightly. He was already sensing where this was going. "But I've realized something over the past 18 months, I continued. "When Harold pushed me out, he inadvertently freed me to build something I never would have attempted otherwise. Something that's entirely mine. And I think I meant to keep building that on a bigger scale." I explained the Westbridge offer. Not to boast, but to show them that my decision wasn't about avoiding challenges or taking the easy path. "You've proven that my work has real value," I said. "And now I'm going to take that lesson and apply it where it can have the broadest possible impact." Celeste actually smiled. "We can't argue with that logic. Though we'll miss the opportunity to work with you directly. I'll always be grateful for what this experience taught me," I said honestly. Harold thought he was burying the person who kept his department functional. Instead, he freed me to become something more. I shook hands with each board member, left both offices, and walked out into the afternoon sunlight. The air felt crisp and full of possibility. Harold had lost everything trying to bury someone whose competence threatened his carefully constructed facade. And I'd won not through revenge, but through the simple choice to value myself as much as my work deserved. My consulting firm was about to become a division of a national powerhouse. My name would carry weight in industries I'd never even imagined working in. And I never once looked back at the company that had tried to make me small. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just success that speaks for itself.